Okay, so this is the podcast on nutrient cycles. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible, but I want really urge you to make sure you jot down this target as well as pull out your POGOL that has the water cycle and the carbon cycle. And if you notice, the new one that we're going to talk about here is the nitrogen cycle. So let's go ahead and get started and look at the water cycle. So I'm going to just move over here. So I guess I should just label this so you will label in your notes. Here's the water cycle. And really what we're talking about here is how water moves through the environment. So let's start with, I guess we can start with water in the oceans. Water in the oceans evaporates into the sky and goes into the form of water vapor, upon which then it condenses on clouds. So we've got condensation, or becomes clouds, condenses on dust particles, and then precipitates down, I guess we can label this precipitation. And falls to the ground in the form of rain or ice or sleet or snow, and then back down and falls back down to the ground, where on the ground it can either go to runoff, which then eventually finds its way to the oceans, or into groundwater but through percolation, which then finds its way to the oceans and evaporates. Now there's another thing that we added on to the POGOL, and this is from the runoff, it will go into here's my diagram of a plant. It's my best drawing that I can do. I'm not very artistic. The water is absorbed into the plant and then transpires, this is transpiration, into the water vapor in the air. Okay? So that's essentially the water cycle, and you have a POGOL to look at. Let's talk about the carbon cycle. So let's start with atmospheric carbon dioxide. Atmospheric carbon dioxide, through photosynthesis, finds its way into plants. Plants release carbon dioxide through cellular respiration and also turn it into sugar, which then finds its way to animals. So, finds its way to animals via feeding relationships. So these animals consume the plants. And then when we're talking about animals, we're talking about other organisms as well. So we've got producers, we've got different kinds of consumers, and as it moves through the food chain or food web, each of these steps is going to release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So we've got this process going on, and notice that plants don't really need animals to continue this process. We definitely need plants to continue this process. But sometimes these plants and animals, when they die, they become fossils, which then may lead to what we would call fossil fuels, like oil and coal and that kind of thing. And what we do with it is combustion. We burn those things, releasing more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So this is just kind of a overall process of the carbon cycle, and you need to be able to explain this. But the molecules that we're talking about as they move through this cycle are the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Okay? And the proteins we're going to talk about now when we talk about the nitrogen cycle. So, we're going to talk about how nitrogen moves around in a food web. So let's say that we've got the ground here. I'm going to put some bacteria. This is going to represent bacteria that's in the ground. And I'm going to draw um, some plants. This is grass, I guess. I'm going to draw, let's see if I can do this very well. That doesn't look like a foot at all. Okay. We've got our happy bunny here. So when we talk about nitrogen moving through this cycle, we're actually talking about nitrogen moving from the bacteria that's in the soil into the grass. The grass then providing nitrogen to the bunny, and the bunny providing nitrogen back to the soil by peeing, or when it dies, this as it moves back into the soil, the bacteria also put atmospheric nitrogen into the air. But there's also other bacteria in the soil that consume it out of the air and turn it into plant food. But as plants, plants turn that into protein. It finds its way to animals, moves up a food chain or a food web, and as those things die and decompose, the bacteria that decompose the dead matter convert some of that nitrogen back into plant matter or into the air and back down into the soil and so on and so. So what you should know is that animals don't get that nitrogen straight out of the air. It's got to come through the plants to the animals. Okay? And that's essentially it. There's a lot more detail to the nitrogen cycle. These are the basics that you need to know. And that should be it. That's a quick podcast, 7 minutes, and we're done.